Thank you for watching Conscious Consumer Network. The live stream broadcast is free to view. You can pause and rewind live broadcasts to catch up, or view shows at a later date by accessing our free archives of all shows. Check out our broadcast guide to see what's on. You can show your support by donating to our network support fund. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or subscribe to the monthly newsletter for updates. We thank you for supporting free and independent media. The mainstream media and international community have largely ignored the atrocities and genocide that is going on in my home country of South Africa. As economic refugees living abroad, we as independent media fight to expose the truth and find solutions for the many suffering and impoverished people still stuck in South Africa. This is Stop South African Genocide, hosted by Mel V and Karin Smith, live on CCN. Hi everybody, my name is Mel V, coming to you live from Conscious Consumer Network headquarters here in Portugal. As always, it is great to be with you for our scheduled broadcast of Stop South African Genocide. And as always, I'm joined with my gracious co-host, the amazing Karin Smith, all the way from Texas. And of course, our guest today, Alex, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you with us on the show.
Hey, well, thank you guys both very much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Hi, Alex. It's really great to have you here. And I personally wanted to extend my thanks to you for writing for such a long time so many articles about the situation in South Africa, because so few people are willing to even look at it. Now, I know you lived in South Africa. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, it's kind of a random story. It almost doesn't even make sense. But on the day of my 18th birthday, I came into some money that I had earned when I was younger as an actor. And I wasn't in school. I had been kicked out of school. I didn't have really anything important going on. I had some friends from South Africa who I knew from living in Switzerland. And I just decided that it would be a fun thing. So literally on the day of my 18th birthday, when I got access to my cash, I bought a plane ticket. Flew down to South Africa, bought a car, rented an apartment on the beach, and just really weird story. And then I stayed until I didn't have enough money in the bank account anymore for for them to renew my visa, and so then I had to leave. But during my time there, I really got to love South Africa, the people of South Africa, the different cultures in South Africa. And I was young and dumb at the time, so I probably would have done things a little differently if I went down there at this age in my life. But I developed a passion for South Africa and for the people there, and I kind of got an insight into what was going on that I don't think an outsider who's never been there, who's never experienced it, would understand. And then, it was probably, almost 10 years after I was there, maybe not quite that long, but maybe 7 or 8 years after I was there, that I started getting information from other South Africans. I had started writing journalism by that time, and I was writing for different newspapers and magazines. And people started getting in touch with me, and I started hearing from friends in South Africa, hey, things are not going very well. Nobody's talking about it. Will you look into this? And so I decided to start doing that. And I think my first big article, I think, came out in 2011 or 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And when I started doing the research for that, that was right around the time that Gregory Stanton of Genocide Watch had gone to do a fact-finding investigation. And, I had heard rumors. I knew things were bad. I knew there was crime off the charts. I even knew about the farm murders. It's pretty well known. But I didn't realize until hearing Dr. Stanton the scope of the problem. And, when he talked about the government links, then I started kind of connecting dots in my head. Oh, yeah, they're always singing these songs about, bring me my machine gun. We're going to shoot all the Boers. Like, wow, this is crazy. And so, I just realized that something had to be written. And unfortunately, the American people, and really not the American people, but the American people are guilty by extension for allowing their leaders to do this. But the American government played a big role in it. And so, to some extent, I think the American people need to wake up and see what their government leaders helped contribute to. And so now we have a responsibility to, help fix the mess that we made. And I'm never an advocate for the U.S. government going overseas and, doing things, meddling in other countries. But when you make a big mess, you got to play some role in helping to fix it. So.
Well, Alex, the latest crime figures came out today. Now, you know as well as I do that the figures reported by the government are doubtful, extremely doubtful, because 2 years back what they did was they took government crime figures and compared them to the mortuary figures. And the difference was about 100% on murder alone. The bodies in the mortuaries that the government were putting on the death certificates, death by natural causes, stabbed 13 times and shot and burnt, natural causes. It was sheer old age that killed you. Those things, they just didn't match up. So nobody has taken that very much further. But if you take today's crime figures that were released, there are 2 murders per hour in South Africa and over 100 rapes per hour in South Africa. Now, it defies understanding why the world media is refusing to report on this. I can understand that there's an embargo in South Africa or there's an embargo in Europe, but the whole world sitting by in silence, they know about this. Alex, you said so yourself in your opening remarks. They know about the farm murders. They maybe don't realize the scope of them, but they know about it. The United States did a joint military exercise in South Africa about 6 weeks ago. They have an embassy in South Africa. They know what is going on there. Why then is everybody turning their back on these horrific murders in South Africa and absolutely refusing to report on it?
I think there's actually, and it's just my opinion, but I think there's actually several different factors at work here. I think, with the media, a big part of it is, they played a role in bringing this about. The American media, the European media, they played a big role in causing the situation that South Africa is now dealing with. They promoted, actual communist terrorists by any definition of the term communist, member of the Communist Party, and terrorists, murdering women and children to advance a political cause. By any definition, the ones who the Western media was supporting were communist terrorists. And so now we're seeing the handiwork, and they don't want to admit responsibility. Nobody wants to admit that they've done something stupid or that they've done something embarrassing, or worse, that they've done something that's caused a country to implode and is causing mass murders and rapes and so on. So I think on the one hand, they're hesitant to admit their role in this. On the other, they're trying to bring about a similar situation in the United States and in Europe, and it would probably interfere a lot with their plans if people realize, hey, they tried this before in South Africa, and it didn't work well, right? It's resulted in this horror show that we see right now. I think there's some sense that everybody is just terrified of being labeled with a bad word. They call Donald Trump a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, Islamophobe, every kind of silly label you can think of, and it's losing a lot of its sting because people realize now that they're just calling everybody that for no reason when there's no evidence. But still, there's a lot of paranoia, especially among the liberal elites who run the newspapers and the TV shows and so on, of maybe being associated with something like that. And finally, I think there is an organized effort, and this is not even my opinion. I mean, we have tons of documentation, tons of evidence that this is occurring. That there's people who want to set up, they really want to fundamentally transform. Obama said he wanted to fundamentally transform the United States, and they want to set up this global system. They've told us about it. They go on television and talk about it. And when you realize what's happened in South Africa and that they plan something similar for the world, people would recoil in horror. So as long as nobody knows what's going on down there, it's much easier to continue selling similar policies, similar people to the American people and to the people of Europe. And so I think that's the kind of confluence of factors at work here. And, I've been encouraged that there has been some growing level of attention. And it's all happened, I think, because of the alternative media. It's had to bypass all of the establishment media channels. But just recently, Breitbart had picked it up. Some of the big newspapers in right. So I mean, that was a good development. And then Breitbart is a very influential media outlet. You had the Australian, I believe it was, or some big newspaper in Australia. I can't remember which one, but a guy called Frank. I don't even remember his last name, but the mainstream Journal was reporting on some of the farm murders. It's been, appearing in some of the British papers now, the Daily Mail. So I think there's going to come a point where they can no longer conceal it. I mean, if you go on YouTube, you see, people like Stephen Molyneux. If you go on, InfoWars has been talking about this for quite some time. So there are tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people who are aware of what's happening. And, the more they try to conceal it, the mainstream media, if you will, and I really think that's a bad term. They're really mainstream about them. But, the more they try to conceal that, the worse they're going to look. So I think at some point, they're going to have to report on what's going on. They'll probably try to put their spin on it. And I think we're moving in that direction. It's just very sad that, so many people have to die in the interim. So much horror has to take place before, people will finally wake up and do their job and report on what's happening around the world.
Yeah, Mel and I have been doing this for almost as long as you have, and it's scary that no matter how great our efforts are, I was on 700 other shows apart from my own in the last 2 years. And that was encouraging. But the problem there is you do one show with the people and then they move on because the attention span is so small. So we're not hammering the people constantly with our story. They hear about it, they're all shocked, there are a dozen comments, and then we move on to something else. And so it's kind of dispiriting that you work so hard with very little result. Yes, I have seen result recently because a bunch of us, and I mean a bunch of us all over the world, have bombarded Breitbart because we're hoping that through Breitbart we can get to President Trump because of the Bannon connection there. So that is kind of the hope there. So lots of us, and I mean lots of us, have bombarded Breitbart until they wrote that article. InfoWars, yes, recently they did a couple of things with Statelanders, but that took practically an act of parliament to make them pay attention. Really, it's scary that you just...
Well, and I'll tell you something also, Karin. I know a lot of these people. I'm a regular guest on InfoWars, and a lot of my colleagues are. I went on Michael Savage, one of the biggest radio hosts in America, and talked about this. He's got 5-10 million listeners. So I don't think it's that they're not interested. It's that the problem is, there's so many things going on, and this is especially true for America. I grew up overseas my entire life. I'm only just settling into America, and I'm still overseas an awful lot. But Americans are very concerned with what happens in America, and I think right now they have good reason to be, because America is under siege. The President of the United States is under siege. There are people who want to literally destroy this country, bring down this country, and so and it's not a defense of ignoring what's going on in other places, but South Africa just seems so far removed, so remote, and when you have the same people that destroyed South Africa trying to destroy your country, you're worried about your own country and your own survival, and you don't really have time to worry about the problems that other people have. And that's not to excuse the lack of attention that's been given. I think it's shameful that so little has been reported on South Africa all these years, despite what's going on there. And I think there's also a lack of understanding about the relationship between the Afrikaners and South Africans and America. Americans don't think of the Afrikaner people as their cousins, as their siblings. The American people have more in common with the Afrikaner than any other people in the world. There's a fantastic book that lays this all out, Amabulu, The Birth and Death of the Second America. There's no people in the world who have as close a connection as the Afrikaners to the American people, not even the British. In fact, we're much closer in our history and our culture to the Afrikaner than we are with the British. We both fought the British, right? Because the British were oppressing us. Yeah. And so there's a lack of understanding about that. So, for most Americans who hear about that, oh, yeah, well, that's just, some third world country far away and, what a mess. But, hey, our country's being destroyed. We better focus on this. So I think that's probably part of the problem. But I have been encouraged to see more coverage of this. And I think we are going to get more coverage. I think, the cat is out of the bag, so to speak. It's not going to go back in the bag. So now as more people learn about this, as more journalists hear about what's happening, they're not going to be able to conceal it forever. But, they're trying hard. So
I do think, however, that this FBI and UK intelligence operation at the moment, looking into the state capture by the Guptas and the 783 criminal cases against President Zuma, I do think that that is going to make a difference. And the ANC are not doing themselves any favors by attacking busloads of tourists from Holland, etc., etc. Those things cannot be kept hidden because their own countries report on it. So my hope is that this FBI investigation, which apparently is going to be very broad-based, will make some impact on the news. But, you know, investigating criminal financial things is not drawing attention to the murders. And somehow they seem to manage to talk about one thing as if it's in isolation from the rest. So they can talk about a corrupt government, etc., but they still don't mention the murders. And that is, it's just craziness to me, because you need to look at the bigger picture. And for me, if the world had been paying attention to South Africa, you may have been able to stop some of what's happening in your own countries by stopping it there first, because that was the blueprint for the rest of the world.
That's exactly right. And, you know, I tell people this all the time. South Africa is the canary in the coal mine, so to speak. You know, and when you see that South Africa is sick, it's, you know, it's kind of like a microcosm for what's happening to Western civilization. And I really see it that way. In fact, I recently contributed a chapter to a book about Obama, and, you know, Obama used to brag all the time that South Africa is what got him involved in politics in the first place. I mean, if you look at South Africa, it's like a mini version of what they want to do to the rest of the world. And if you look at the Afrikaner people as a kind of a microcosm for Western civilization, you know, Christianity, ordered liberty, rule of law, Western-style civilization and culture, we're dealing with the exact same problem. It's just on a micro scale. And in South Africa, they tried this, you know, multiculturalism, the rainbow thing, where everybody's going to live under the same government. And what we see is that the remnants of that Western civilization are under threat like never before. You know, the church is under attack. And, you know, when you scale that up to the whole world, we're dealing with the same thing. They're trying to set up, you know, a multicultural global governing type of system in which Western civilization and what's left of Christendom is not expected to survive. At least that's what these people are orchestrating this hope. And so, you know, I've written on this pretty extensively. I think the American people need to learn a lot of lessons from what's happened there. And that's not to say that, you know, we just learn the lessons and say, all right, bye, South Africa, you know, good to know you. We need to learn the lessons and then worry about, you know, what are we going to do to help clean up the mess over there that we've made. So.
And it is a terrible, terrible mess. I mean, I look at this every day because in order to report on it, you have to know what's happening. So I'm in close contact with a lot of people in South Africa. Mel and I have interviewed some influential South Africans who are equally desperate to make the world pay attention. Because, as we've just said, if you had paid attention to South Africa, instead of let it drop off the map in 1994, it's as if it fell into the sea and disappeared. The silence surrounding it has been deafening. If they had looked at the slow progression of events in South Africa, they could have stopped. Or if they'd stopped it in South Africa, it may not have spread. That's kind of my feeling.
Oh, absolutely. You're 100% right, Karin. And you know what? One of the magazines that I write for most often, the New American, I'm a foreign correspondent there, and that's where a lot of my work on South Africa has appeared. If you go back and read what the New American was writing in the late 80s, in the early 90s, I mean, you would say that William Jasper, my colleague, must have had some kind of crystal ball to see the future, because he predicted exactly what was going to happen, and we're watching it play out now. So it didn't take a brain surgeon to figure out what was going on, or a rocket scientist. I mean, it was very obvious to anybody who was putting the pieces together where this was all going, what the forces behind it were trying to achieve, and what the end result was going to be. And in fact, the John Birch Society, the parent organization of the New American magazine, actually brought a number of South Africans over here and put them on a speaking tour, including Mayor Linda. I think he was black African tribe leaders, a mayor of some big municipality, explaining, hey, the ANC is a crazy communist terrorist organization. You guys would be insane to leave them in charge of South Africa. And, it was very obvious where this was all going to go. So this is not a mystery. But you're right. The coverage has completely fallen away, and that's because they don't want people to see what their handiwork has accomplished. I mean, it's like the little kid who breaks a vase and then tries to sweep up the vase real quick so that mommy and daddy won't see it, right? Well, that's exactly what we're seeing here. They broke it, and now they don't want to let people know that they played such a big role in breaking it. And the difference is that, rather than a vase and broken glass, we're dealing with broken lives and murdered people and tortured people and a destroyed nation and a destroyed culture. And, it's just tragic beyond belief. But, I do think that the word is getting out now. I think there's many people, including in the Trump administration, who know what's going on. Unfortunately, you mentioned the military exercise. I happen to know that a lot of Obama holdovers are still operating in the Defense Department and the State Department, including on the desks dealing with sub-Saharan Africa. And so I think that's a big part of the problem. But there are people within the Trump administration who know what's going on, who are concerned about what's going on, and I think we need to keep pushing to get something done about this. And even just speaking out about it would be a good first step, because the newspapers can't ignore it when the President of the United States is saying something.
Yeah, that is kind of the hope of all South Africans, because I've been watching since Trump was elected, and that was the greatest hope, that he would turn things around. Now, we all know that there's no white knight going to arrive in South Africa to save them. They have to do something to help themselves. We all know that. I mean, I don't see NATO or some such force rushing in there to save the whites, because it's going to be a political nightmare for everybody. I do understand that, and I think South Africans at heart understand that as well. But we do need some, even if it's only moral support from people around the world, to say, look, this is wrong. This is totally wrong what you're doing. So now from there, I want to lead into something that I know you know about, but the world is also not reporting on. So on the 24th of September, the king of the Khoisan, King Kubaha Cornelius III, stood up in front of the walls of the castle in Cape Town and seceded from South Africa. If Mel and I had not organized a live feed of that, there would be absolutely no record of it outside of South Africa. Not a word. The South African press are not talking about it, but they've been told not to. As far as I understand it, the ANC is hoping that if silence reigns, it'll all just go away. But our hope was that the alternate media at least would pick up on this and speak about it. Silence. And no matter who we've contacted and asked, including Stefan Molyneux, to please say something about this, because he has great influence in the alternate media. Not a word. So far, Jeff Rentz, Alfred, I can't pronounce his surname, and ourselves are the only ones so far. That Mel's laughing at me.
that would be Alfred Lambermont Weber. I just want to make sure that we mention him, because he's an old and dear friend. But
yes.
He's got a big audience, and we obviously have had his legal opinion as well. He studied law at Yale University in several tribunals, so he's legally qualified to look at this information and say, whether it's validated under international law or not. And he, like Professor Nagin, had validated this Khoisan claim to the sovereignty of the nation, and he has in fact the legal right to secede. So that's where we sit with that.
I didn't want to mangle his surname because it's so rude, and I just can't pronounce it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting situation. I have not reported on it either yet. I've reached out to a good number of people, and a good number of people have reached out to me about it on both sides, saying that, hey, this is a good idea, or hey, this is not a good idea. As a journalist who's supposed to report on the news, I can't take a position, but in my personal capacity, I do think secession may be one of the only viable options to help, preserve what's what's left of the Afrikaner culture and the Afrikaner people. I've talked to good friends who are South African who want to, organize a referendum where there would be some kind of legal vote, under, I think it's Article 208 of the Constitution and so on. So, it's hard to really determine what's going on. I have been just shocked that nobody has really talked about, what the king there had said during his speech. Yeah, it sounds newsworthy to me. I've just kind of been taking a wait and see position and see where the chips fall before, jumping in here. But, it is pretty shocking that a development like that has not received any coverage. And, I guess we'll have to see where it goes. But, there's one guy whose opinion I value very, very highly, the author, South African, the Afrikaner, the author of Amabulu that I mentioned earlier. Yeah. And I learned more in that book about South Africa than I learned in everything else I read about South Africa combined. I mean, it's just, I can't recommend the book highly enough. He and I have a couple of minor disagreements on a few things that, we both have different opinions on George H.W. Bush, for example. But I think he likes George Bush because he put Mandela on the terrorist list quite properly, and the ANC. I have pretty strong differences of opinion with George H.W. Bush because he went on television and told us he was building a new world order in which the UN's peacekeeping forces were going to enforce the vision of the UN's founders, who, of course, were Joseph Stalin, the mass-murdering maniac, Alger Hiss, the Soviet spy in the United States, who served as first Secretary General. But our differences of opinion aside, I get so many emails from South Africans who read my article. They say, oh, my goodness, I have kids. I'm terrified. We don't have money to get out of the country, or we can't go to any country. What should I do? And I have no idea. I'm just a guy who just spent a little bit of time there and has some friends there. And so I call him up and, what do I tell these people? He said, tell them, get to the Western Cape. Go to the Western Cape. Whether you have to leave your farm, and even if you can't sell it, get over there because, and I know a lot of Afrikaners are horrified to hear this, especially the Boers. No way, because he says, hey, the Great Trek was a strategic mistake, and it's going to cost a lot to finally recognize that. But what the only chance that the Afrikaner has for survival is to congregate in the Western Cape and to declare independence formally and legally before and as I understand it, the ANC is now shipping in Xhosa and others by the busload as quickly as they can to make sure that if and when there is a referendum, the numbers aren't going to be there anymore to secede. So, the clock is ticking. It's a horrible situation. There really are no good solutions to this. I mean, there is no solution that we're going to say everything's going to work out just fine if we do that. There is none. It's just, it's a terrible situation all around. It's, there is no good way out of this, but that was what he told me. Tell people when they contact you, get to the Western Cape, and, if you have to sell your farm, or if you can't sell your farm, doesn't matter, what means more to you, your life or your farm, get to the Western Cape. And a lot of people don't want to hear that. They say, well, my great-great-grandpa settled this land, and there's no way I'm leaving. This is my land. Okay. I don't know what more to tell you. I sympathize like you can't imagine it, it's like someone telling me, you got to leave Florida, right? Well, what? My ancestors had come from Florida. I'm not going anywhere. But, it's, I think he's got a point. He is an Afrikaner. He loves the Afrikaner like nobody else. I mean, he understands their history and their culture better than anybody I've ever met. And so that's his advice. And, it just as an outsider looking in, I say that advice sounds pretty sensible to me. And, he also says if you can get out and, that's what you want to do, that might not be a bad idea because things look really terrible. But, it's another thing. How can you tell somebody whose ancestors have been there for 300, 400 years, hey, you got to go. Where are you going to go to? It's just a terrible situation.
In 1 second, I'm going to go and fetch the book and just hold it up to give it a plug.
Oh, do you have a copy? Oh, I have one.
I do. If you would talk about, while I go fetch it, it'll only take me a second. If you would talk about why the rest of the world will not let them in, because even if they want to leave, they can't, because they can't get immigration visas somewhere else. Apart from the ones who are in the camps who don't have money, who couldn't do it anyway. The rest of them, the people who have money, either have money offshore and are visa in their passport already, so they can leave at the drop of a hat, or have left. The ones remaining behind cannot leave because no one will take them.
Yeah. And, that's another travesty. And it's something that I've been concerned about for a long time. The U.S. government will admit just about anybody as a refugee. You could be a gangbanger from Central America covered with tattoos on your face. Say, oh, I'm 17. I'm a child. And, oh, okay, we'll step right in here. We'll get you a tax-funded apartment, tax-funded health care. We'll put you in school with actual 17-year-olds. And, this is the situation now in most of the West. Sweden, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium. They'll take anybody from any part of the world, totally alien cultures. You might hate Western culture, Christianity, etc. And they'll roll out the welcome mat and pour out the tax-funded benefits. But then for some reason, the Afrikaners, nope, no such luck, right? They won't take them. And I think that's just an absolute injustice. And, I know some Afrikaners will say, well, why are you saying that, Alex? If people could leave, they would. And then, the Afrikaner people would die out. They would just go and die out and be spread out among the rest of the world. And, okay, but there are people who have kids who want to get out. They are persecuted. There's no question about it. They are at a significant risk of having something happen to them. And, if anybody deserves refugee status here in the United States, I would say it's, the embattled Afrikaner farmers up in the northwest of South Africa who are facing just horror and brutality and torture and violence and mass murder, and a president who goes and sings songs about murdering you with machine guns because of your ethnicity. And they would fit right in America. I mean, they're practically Americans. They speak Afrikaans, okay, but they're Christian. They're American in the sense that, Americans left from Europe because we wanted religious freedom. We left from Europe because we didn't want to be oppressed by the monarchs of Europe. We fought the British because we didn't want to be part of the crazy British Empire. And, we have a lot in common. They would make wonderful Americans. They'd be better Americans than most Americans. And it's sad to say that, but they would be. And so if anybody should be welcome here, I would say it's them. But unfortunately, to admit them would be to admit that, hey, we totally destroyed South Africa. We are partly responsible for the decimation of a people, of a nation, and nobody wants to admit that.
Mm. And did you see that Canada turned down the application of a family last week or the week before, saying that they are using racist excuses for their application? So essentially what Canada has said is that everything that we're talking about right now is a lie. If you're saying we are racist, there is no truth to it, and these people must go back to South Africa.
That is absolutely insane. I mean, you can go on YouTube right now and you can find a video of Jacob Zuma singing, "Bring me my machine gun, we're going to shoot the Boer." Yes. And, his fake sign language interpreter gesticulating and the troops doing some kind of weird dance. Any other country in the entire world, if you had the president singing songs about exterminating a minority group, everybody in the world would recognize that something is wrong here. Yes. And yet it only, when it's in this situation, when it's the ANC president who we helped put in power singing about exterminating, Christian, Western-minded people, then suddenly we have to turn our eyes away and pretend like that's not happening. That is absolutely disgraceful, and that is absolutely shameful. And I'm the first one to be concerned about, genocides of any kind of people. Just earlier this week, I was writing about Mugabe exterminating the Ndebele people in South Zimbabwe. So, and in Libya, they were exterminating black Africans. They were putting them in cages and shoving flags down their throats, saying that they were, mercenaries of Libya. So it's, it's not that this is the only problem in the world, but it's that there's an incredible double standard. There's incredible hypocrisy here. And to say that, we can't pay attention to that one because, he's the ANC and the ANC is saints and the Afrikaners are white, and so we can't mention anything about that. But, that is shameful, that is racist, and that's disgusting. And, anybody who says that, I think it needs to really examine their beliefs and their hearts. What's their problem?
Yeah. So there's the book that you're talking about.
Yeah, I have a copy as well. It's an incredible book. It's a long read. It's so good. I did a review of it, so if people want to read my review before going out and buying the book, that's available at thenewamerican.com. It's called What Americans Must Learn from the Death of South Africa, something like that. Yes. And, you'll get kind of my very, very condensed summary of this incredible book. And, for people to understand, it's not just a history book. I mean, it is, in a sense, a history book, and it brings you up all the way to the present time. But it also interweaves these incredible personal stories. from Harry Bouyen's family. They settled there, some of them hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And so he traces the lives of his ancestors and what they did and where they went. And you just get this marvelous, beautiful picture of this incredible people, this incredible nation that settled in South Africa and, tried to build civilization there and to spread the gospel and to, farm the land and find religious freedom. The Huguenots, for example, were just being massacred in France. They wanted religious freedom. And it puts to bed so many of the myths that are fundamental to, what's happened and what's happening. And, once those myths are destroyed, all of the pretext for what's happening disappears. And so that's why I encourage people, read that book and get familiar with the history.
There's one other one. I don't know if you've read it, Bulala.
I have not read that.
You have to. That is my Bible. That book is battered and bent. It's got Post-it notes all over it. I use it. I use it for everything because Kieran Elgin writes eloquently and beautifully. It's such a wonderful. It's almost a novel. It's not like reading history at all. It's a fascinating book. I can't wait for his follow-up. I keep prodding him, when we're getting the next book. But you must read it, Alex. It's not as big as that. I tried to read that just after my surgery and I couldn't even hold the book up. It's such a big, heavy book. But Bulala is the most incredible book on South African history, and it also puts a lot of the lies to rest, because the world has been told an incredible number of lies about white South Africans, about the history of South Africa, about us stealing land and dispossessing the blacks and murdering them in their thousands. And all of those things were addressed in the Reconciliation Commission led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I mean, their own numbers, their own reports put the lie to all of these stories about oppressing and murdering thousands upon thousands of black people. But people don't know. And I don't know whether it's because they don't want to know or because it's easier to just say, well, we deserve what's happening now without looking at the lies that they've been told. I don't know what the reasoning is behind it. But if people just did a little bit of investigation, they would find out that people like Mel and myself, white South Africans, are not monsters. We don't have dripping fangs and we don't have horns and we don't run out in the street with knotted ropes and drag black people behind our vehicles. We're people just like everybody else. Yeah. We're concerned.
I think I can't think of any people in my lifetime in recent memory who have been demonized in the way that the Afrikaners have. Yes. And it's so unfair. I know many of them. They're such wonderful people. I had such a great time in South Africa getting to know them. I mean, they are, again, just like Americans. Find a random farmer in Iowa or Kansas, good Christian people who, want what's best for everybody. I mean, it's a marvelous people. I just absolutely love the Afrikaner and the demonization of them. It seems to be a normal thing. Good people have to be demonized and constantly attacked, and bad people get painted as some kind of heroes. And I think what happened in South Africa is a perfect example of that. Yes. And they painted actual communist terrorists as if they were some kind of heroic liberators fighting for justice. And and we see the results of founding policy based on absolute lies. Now it's so tragic. And, I think the demonization of the Afrikaners has been so unfair and so evil. It breaks my heart. And they're doing the same thing to Americans now around the world. Yeah. I grew up overseas, so I noticed this. And already we were pretty hated. But, it's getting worse and worse. They're making, regular, everyday Americans look like some kind of monsters. And, they paint our police as just racist yahoos going around killing black people. And it's just not true. That's not an accurate picture of Americans or our police. But, we're seeing the same process take place, and they're using it against Americans, too. Trying to send everybody on a guilt trip, and, we'll be happy for you to dismantle our country and take down our statues and erase our culture and demonize the founders of our country. And it's based on lies. It's just incredible that they've gotten away with it.
But even that, Alex, even that started in South Africa. It started with Rhodes Must Fall, and those statues having feces thrown at them and being pulled down. And there was a little stir in England about it because it spread to Rhodes University there, spread by as a black scholar on a Rhodes scholarship. So he was benefiting from this whole thing, but he started the fuss at Rhodes University. So yes, it spread a little. The world commented a little because it had spread to Britain, but then it went quiet again. Now you're having the exact same thing here. You're having them burning classrooms, you're having them burning books, you're having them burning pictures, pulling down statues. It all started in South Africa.
Yep. And when I saw it happening in South Africa, I knew it was coming. It was a couple of years ago, I think, that I started getting emails from people in South Africa. Hey, look, they're attacking statues. They're throwing paint at them, demanding that they all take down all the statues, stop teaching it. Even Afrikaans universities can't teach in Afrikaans anymore.
Yes.
And I said, oh, that is coming to America. I'm sure of it. And then, like night follows day, there it was. And I suspect, they've perfected their strategy. They'll probably be even more effective in trying to use it in the United States. But we have a new additional thing on our side, which is the internet. So, now there's a way to get the truth out. And I think a lot of people in the United States are waking up to this. And it's causing them to wake up to a whole lot more as well. So I think there's, it's a double-edged sword for them. I think the lies are being exposed and the media has lost all its credibility. So, there are some encouraging signs on the horizon here too.
But too slow for white South Africans. I really think it's too slow for them because there are three threats at the moment that are of real concern. The law about taking away confiscation of, it's literally confiscation of land without any compensation. Now that is being held up in the courts at the moment. But because it's being held up, Black Land First, the ANC and the EFF are saying, well, we are coming for white land from the 31st of December by any means necessary. You know what that means, and I know what that means. And it doesn't just mean farmers. It means your business, your residential property, anything you own. So there's that threat. And 31st of December is not far off. It's not far off. So it's scary.
It is.
And then there are rumors of a threat from the 28th of this month, which is Saturday, to start killing 4,000 whites per night in South Africa. Now, I don't have documented proof of that, but I have well-respected people who have been telling me about that. Now, murder threats of that huge amount are probably overstated a little. But if you already have 2 murders a day and the white people are so scattered and over 4,000 farmers have been tortured to death and over 85,000 white people have been tortured to death in the last 20 years, is it so far-fetched to say that this uhuru that they have been planning for the last 20 years is not going to happen from Saturday? I'm not putting my head on the block that that's what's going to happen. I'm simply reporting on stories, rumors, and fears that are out there.
And I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility, Karin. I mean, if you read these documents that the ANC and the South African Communist Party have put together on the, the National Democratic Revolution, they talk about a process that needs to happen in stages. I heard recently the analogy, and it's widely used in other contexts as well. But when you boil a frog, if you put him in boiling water, he's going to jump right out. So you got to boil slowly, so that he'll be cooked before he realizes what's happening. So I think there's some element to that. But at some point, I think once they feel that things are in place, I don't think it's out of the question that you could have the start of mass killings. And you have the president of the country singing genocide songs. Yeah. I mean, that is a very dangerous situation where you dehumanize and demonize a minority group within a country. And you blamed all the problems in the country on that minority group, and it's very easy for things to spiral out of control. When you look at the rhetoric of people like Julius Malema of the EFF and these black first, land first activists who just openly, I see them on Twitter. They talk about, hey, let's go burn down the farms, let's go kill white people, just openly like that. It's it's not unreasonable to have concerns about this spiraling out of control and, just leaving, this kind of crazy orgy of violence. I think people need to be very, very concerned. And, I tell people, make sure you're taking care of your own security. Make sure you have emergency plans. You can't rely on the police to protect you. And I say that even in America, where the police are still very good and very decent and honorable for the most part. How much so in South Africa, where half more maybe of the police are brainwashed into the same kind of dehumanization and victimization that they're pushing. It's a very dangerous situation, and I think people should be on alert all the time.
Well, when the police and the defense forces guns are being
stolen, huh?
Yeah, I was trying to think of a really good word for that without saying it, but yes, stolen in their thousands.
Yeah.
There was a report this morning, that same crime report says that 1,600 and something crimes have been linked to the 2,000 guns stolen from one police station. So that is reported by the police. So can you imagine what the real numbers are, Alex?
Yeah, and I've seen photos from some of these farm attacks, caught on CCTV cameras and stuff. Some of these attackers have very sophisticated technology. I mean, they're getting this stuff from a government. These are not just, random criminals looking for cell phones and wallets to steal. These are people who have been armed and trained and prepared. I think we need to be looking at Mr. Mugabe in Zimbabwe and probably elements of the ANC. The other day there was this debate in Parliament about the farm murders, and the maniac MP from the ANC, I think he was like the Minister for Education or Higher Education, says, well, bury them alive. I mean, what?
Yes.
Any other country, if this was happening in any other country, to any other minority group, the whole world would be looking and saying, what is going on here? The double standards and the hypocrisy, as I said before, are just off the charts. And, I think at some point there's going to have to be a proper investigation. Who was supplying the weapons to these people? Who was supplying the training? The cell phone jamming technology. That's not something that you just buy on the civilian market. That came from somebody in a state somewhere. So maybe Zimbabwe, maybe South Africa, who knows? But somebody needs to answer for that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so now talking about Mugabe, I just have to throw this in here. That's not the right moment. But the fact that he was appointed by the United Nations as Goodwill Ambassador. Can you believe it? I believe they've withdrawn it because of the absolute uproar worldwide about it. But can you believe? And we, the white South Africans, are looking to the United Nations for help. Oh, my Lord. If that is a Goodwill Ambassador.
Actually, it's funny you mentioned. I just wrote an article about it. I think it was my most recent article. And I encourage people to read it because I touch on all sorts of different things. But I'm not surprised at all. You say, can you believe it? Of course I can believe it. And that's because I know the United Nations. The United Nations is not what we've been told. It is, in fact, I call it the Dictators Club. And that's a short summary of it. But it is a tool of very, very wicked people to try to build up, in simple terms, a totalitarian global system. And they go on television and they talk about it. George H.W. Bush, we were talking about earlier, talked about it. Anybody who's expecting help from the United Nations, stop, right? It's not going to come ever. If anything, the United Nations will be used as a tool to help destroy you and your liberty and your children and your family and your church. And so, do not look to the United Nations for any kind of assistance with anything. Again, and it was incredible to me. What was interesting to me was this World Health Organization. They seem to think that this was all totally normal. So they live in this kind of bubble where it's just a normal thing that a communist head of a UN agency would appoint a mass murdering, genocidal communist dictator. And, Mugabe, he's an evil man, and he, of course, he did an ethnic cleansing campaign of the whites, but people forget he waged a genocide against fellow black Africans too, the Ndebele people in southern Zimbabwe. When he took power, he murdered tens of thousands of them as part of an extermination campaign. So, even if you hate white people, even if that's your thing, he murders black people by the tens of thousands too. This is a very wicked man, and it's a perfect symbol of the United Nations. And so I'm actually happy they did it, because everybody needs to see what this organization is.
I just shook my head. I mean, who in their right mind could think that old cadaver is the right person? I don't know. I don't know, Alex. The world is crazy.
It is.
But we have an obligation. And more than that, it's not even a duty. It's an absolute driven thing to save these people in South Africa. And I have scratched my head for a couple of years now on how to get a louder voice. And that's why I'm so glad you joined us today, because the three of us together can surely put our heads together and find a way to attract attention, because time is desperately short for these people. If they are not willing to give up their farms in northern South Africa and go to the Western Cape and join the secession of the Khoi King, if they're not willing to do that, which I can understand, it's a hell of a big thing on trust to just turn your blocker doors and walk away. I do understand that. I really do. But if they're not willing to do that, what can we as voices outside of South Africa do to help them that we haven't done already?
Well, and I get asked this a fair amount as well. And I think the most important thing that, say, an average American could be doing on this is helping to raise awareness of it. Send emails to your member of Congress, send emails to your local newspaper, send letters to the editor for your local newspaper, contact any journalists who are on the Africa beat. And there's, an increasing number of articles out there with the documentation. Send the videos of Gregory Stanton after his fact-finding mission. I mean, this stuff is irrefutable. There's literally no factual or logical argument that would contradict, the fact that there's an ongoing tragedy that's fixing to get a lot worse if people don't get involved. And so I say, to every American, hey, these people are your cousins. These people are just like you, and these people are only a couple decades ahead of what's going to happen to you if you don't get busy. And so I tell Americans, there's a lot you can do. An average American has far more influence than, an average person in China or in Russia or in Kazakhstan or in Congo. So use that influence. You have money, you have a voice, you have access to the internet, you have your own circle of influence, you have, your elected representatives. There's so much that we could be doing. And for South Africans, I know there are still some who have their head in the sand and, they want to believe the fake news propaganda that, everything's fine. And, if you don't think everything's fine, then there's something wrong with you. Get your head out of the sand if that's you. I know there's not too many of those left. I think even the ones who don't say anything are starting to realize. But, and think seriously about your future. Are the lives of your kids worth it? And I don't know what to tell you to do. As a journalist, it's not even my place to tell you what to do. But do something. Don't just be a victim lying in wait, for whatever's going to come. Make sure you're preparing. And I know there are preparedness groups in South Africa. I interviewed some of the Swedenlanders before they came for their America tour. And, they're doing what a lot of Americans are doing and what I think a lot more people around the world should be doing. And that is preparing for disasters in, the best way possible, in a way that doesn't suggest that, you're going to be a combatant in some sort of war. But certainly, everyone has a right to self-defense. And, just make sure that you're safe and that your family's safe. And, I do think that there is something to the advice that Harry Booyens has, and that is, get to the Western Cape if you can. If the Afrikaner nation is going to survive, it's going to be in the Western Cape. And so, try to think about that at the very least.
Yeah. So there's one other thing that we haven't touched on that is very, very dear to my heart, is the dispossessed white South Africans, the ones in the camps. The numbers are increasing by the day, and the resources available to them are decreasing by the day, because less and less white South Africans have got jobs, so they cannot contribute. That companies may not contribute to white-only charities. So these people are becoming I can't even think of a word for it. They are irrelevant to the world. They're irrelevant to South Africa. They live on garbage heaps. They have no future. Their children are not being educated. They are going to starve to death, literally, because of the bad conditions in South Africa. You know that water shortages in the Cape. They are having rolling water blackouts, as it were. The water's being turned off in certain areas, certain hours of each day. The farmers are practically non-existent. Of the 35,000 remaining farms in South Africa, 20,000 are on the market. They'll never get sold, but they're on the market because they're terrified of them being taken with no compensation. So things for these people look very, very bleak. And South Africans can contribute clothes and blankets and furniture, but they cannot contribute food or money. And the one supply through PayPal donations has been cut off recently to these people. So now what? How do we keep these dispossessed white people, of whom we believe there are 1,300,000 and more children? How do we now set about helping those people stay alive and get to the Cape? It's a third of the white population are in these circumstances. And the ANC has very successfully made it impossible to help them.
Yeah. It's just so sad, and I don't even know. I don't have a good answer to that. I know there's, I spoke with a woman, I think earlier this year, what was her last name? Dupree's or Dupree?
The Oxley Dupree, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And she was doing some amazing work there trying to help them. And, praise God for all the charitable people who are willing to do what they can to help out. But I don't even think it's possible for an American to donate to a charity that would be involved in this. As you mentioned, the ANC is trying to shut it all down. This is, of course, a deliberate policy by the ANC, right? They've instituted racist laws that prevent these people from being able to lawfully support themselves. They can't own businesses. They can't get a job. They can't even access welfare in many cases. And, this is a deliberate policy. The government has done this on purpose, and they're now trying to block off all the avenues for people to even help these people. Yeah. And, again, in any other country, under any other circumstance, this would be recognized instantly by everyone as an atrocity being perpetrated. And yet we're not even supposed to talk about what's happening in South Africa. It's tragic beyond belief. And, I think people need to raise awareness about it, and that's not enough. People need to do what they can, but not being on the ground on South Africa, I really don't even have good advice to give people who want to help these people, because I don't even know how it's possible at this point. Well,
there are very few charities that help with this. There's a Million Stemmer for Steve. There's the Lee Oxley Dupree's. There's this VUS Foundation. There are very few, and very few of them trustworthy, put it that way, because there are a large number of people who are trying to get rich off of this misery. So the donations go where they shouldn't go. Let's put it that way. So I don't know how to help. We raised money for the South African Family Relief to buy a farm. They had rescued 8 people that were living on the farm with them, but now they have no food. They're cooking over fires again because they haven't got money for gas. They haven't got money for their generator. They haven't got money for anything. And I'm kind of at my wit's end now, because the number of dispossessed whites is going to rise exponentially by the end of the year. 58,000 jobs lost this year already, due to be 1 million by the end of the year. Now, obviously not all of those are white people, but the black people do get government support. The whites don't. So these people are literally condemned to death, in my opinion.
Yeah, and there's even more horror stories that go from that. They kidnap these young girls from these camps and put them into sex slavery and trafficking, and I mean it's just horror on top of horror on top of horror, and it's all caused by deliberate government policy. And I hope someday, I know there will be justice eventually, but I hope that there will be justice in this life too. The people who are responsible for this should be held accountable, and the first step to that is making sure that the world knows about it.
Well, Alex, once again, I would really like to thank you, because I've followed your work for many years now with admiration, because
Oh, thank you so much.
there are very few people willing to stand up and be counted in this fight. And it's a fight to the death. And I'm very, very grateful for every voice that is willing to do it. And thank you for spending this time with us. I know you only have an hour. Thank you so very much. And I'd like to invite you to come on again at a later date.
Well, thank you both so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be with you. I wish I could have been longer. I have another appointment coming up in like 1 minute, but we'll definitely have to do it again at some time soon. So thank you, ladies, so much. Thank you for everything you're doing, and let's keep in touch. Huh?
Thank you, Alex.
All right. God bless you guys. Thank you,
Take
guys.
care.
You too.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. That was an amazing, amazing chat to Alex Newman. Very, very interesting indeed to hear his such a articulate perspective. Hey, Karin. He's really spot on. And, you know, for those people who've lived in South Africa and understood our culture to now kind of look at it from the outside in, I think these are the people who really are communicating the most about it. And Alex obviously fits into that genre, just like you and I. Really interesting stuff. But I'm just going to head off to a break video quickly, and we'll come back and pick up when that's done and carry on with some of the updates that need to be done.
If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Mainstream media exists for the purposes of indoctrination and manipulation of public perception. The world of free and independent media is growing, and with the upsurge in information now available in the public domain, it has never been easier to access free and independent media. The exploration of this information resulted in an experimental project which would provide a fully supported space for researchers, whistleblowers, and seekers of all kinds to express themselves and educate the world. On the 1st of January 2015, Conscious Consumer Network was launched to the world. Nobody thought we would make it this far, but CCN is the longest running free and independent media network of its kind. CCN is a unique collaboration of hearts and souls, bringing you information from different perspectives to educate and inform. Since we started CCN, we have had only one desire: the pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world, and this has not changed. Having overcome many challenges over the last 2 years, CCN is here to stay, and we've got great things lined up for 2017. Help keep CCN on the air by supporting the 2017 Network Support Fund.